Okay, so I'm here to talk about jQuery plugins today. I'm going to introduce myself real quick. I am Carolyn. I have been here for just about a year, and this will be my first time, and I hope you enjoy it, and we're going to just go ahead and get started. So the question we have first is, what is a jQuery plugin? jQuery plugin is simply a method that we use to extend jQuery's prototype object. By extending that object, we actually enable all jQuery objects to inherit any of the methods that we add by our plugin. So it looks like it's actually built into jQuery, whether it was part of the core or it was your plugin. It looks the same. The basic idea of a plugin is just to do something with a collection of elements in the page. So you want to take your method, find some elements in the DOM, the document object model, do some manipulation to it, and then return it back so that you can just utilize it. You can consider the methods that come in the jQuery core like a plugin. So if you look at the fade out or the add class, once you create a plugin or once you actually utilize someone else's plugin, it would be similar to that. You would just use a dot, whatever the method or plugin name is. What can plugins do for you? The basic reason for adding any jQuery plugin is to give you the ability to do something on the client side using code, preferably that somebody else has created for you. That way we're not recreating the wheel. We can go and do something that already exists. And a lot of jQuery plugins out there are just awesome. They're little reusable code snippets, so they're not actually built into your project. You can use them across multiple projects. It's like when you create your own assembly, you can just use it in multiple places if you include the proper references. They're generally free and open source code. There have been a few out there that actually ask that you pay for them. It's very rare, and most of the time you won't need to do that. In fact, if they ask you to pay for one, they must have done some really big work or it's not worth it. Finding a jQuery plugin. How would you find one if you actually wanted to use one? There are thousands. There are literally just tons of them out there available online, and they're useful for anything from, like it says on the screen there, table sorting to form validation, navigation. You name it, it's out there. There's probably some for most of the normal needs of a site and some that are not so normal. Google is a good initial resource for locating plugins. There are literally thousands of sites out there, not just plugins, but sites that cater to jQuery plugins. Some plugins are maintained by the jQuery team and can be found on the jQuery site. Those are the ones that you're going to know are well maintained and good code. They're not going to be hacked out stuff that are difficult to use. As I said, there are several sites that cater to jQuery plugins, and one of my favorites is unheap.com. It's got categorized lists of things that are out there that are available to use, and I find a lot of really good opportunities to use the plugins that are out there. There are a few cautions that you need to be aware of, things that you should take notice of when you first go out and look at jQuery plugins. You do need to do your homework because not all plugins have been properly maintained and they haven't been tested. Some people will write it, stick it out there, and say, have at it, and you really don't want to take those. One way to assure that they are tested properly and well maintained is to see that the author has documented it and has provided good examples on how you would use it. Most of the places that, like for example that unheap.com that I mentioned, it will link you to the sites where you can pull these plugins down. And every one that I've looked at there has had documentation on how to use it, and it's well organized for what you can look at. You do need to watch out for plugins that do a lot more than you need. It can add overhead to your page, which causes slowdown on the client when they have to download your stuff, especially if they're not caching. And if they are caching, that initial pull of your plugin could be more than they want. You know, it can make them delay the download, and they won't like it.
Good point, especially thinking of mobile and people have lower bandwidth constraints.
Right. If you have questions about some of the plugins that you actually see online, you can consult the jQuery mailing list, and there's an IRC channel, the pound jQuery, that you can get some feedback from other people who may have used it or who may have some information about it. And for a really good or I guess you would say explanation of what makes something less worthy to be used, there's Signs of a Poorly Written jQuery Plugin by Remy Sharp, and the jQuery site will kind of point you to this. So if you went actually out there to look, this is a good one to kind of give you an idea of what would make one not really one that you would like to choose. So once you've selected a jQuery plugin, you actually have to use it. To do that, you have to add it to your page. There's a few steps to that, but it's really simple. First thing that means is downloading the actual jQuery plugin, and anything that goes with it. There might be CSS files, or it may have dependencies on other JavaScript files. Any of those you need to actually pull down. A lot of them will provide them in zip files. And then you need to put them in the directory structure of the project that you're going to use it with. Then you'd have to put a script tag in your page that actually uses the plugin. It has to come after the jQuery script tag because it uses jQuery. And then the last thing is there's another little bit of script that you'll have to add to actually call and use the functions that the plugin provides. And that is definitely where the author's examples are very nice to have. So what happens if you go out, you search, you're looking for a plugin, you can't find one that fits the need, or you find some that have just way too much and you don't want to pull something down that has more than you need? I just said that. One option, of course, would be to write your own code. You could write it in another language or a development environment that you're familiar with. For us, that could be C# or what have you. But sometimes you'll find, like in C#, that's actually not client-side code. That would be server-side code. So it would not necessarily do exactly what you want without having to go a round trip to the server and back. Or you could write it in JavaScript or something else that would work. Another option would be to purchase something from a third-party vendor that does what you want. There are all kinds of things out there. That's usually the least desirable choice. But another option would be to write your own plugin. And this is actually pretty cool. So if you choose to make your own, you can make your own for private use inside of your own business or company or just personal. It doesn't have to be something that anybody else could use. You could also make them public and make them available to anybody who wants it. You can release these to the jQuery team. They can, talk to them. They've got sites out there where you can release it, put it out on GitHub, whatever it is. And this actually is a pretty cool little possible choice for you to make, because you can take all the functions that you use a lot and make your own little library of plugins that can do for you, for your business, things that you do repeatedly. So the only barrier to creating a plugin is knowing how to do that, and it's actually very easy. So I'm going to walk you through the process of what it would take to create a plugin. This is our boilerplate. So to write a jQuery plugin, it's really easy. You have to start first by adding a new function property to the jQuery FN object. And the name of the property, in this case my plugin, would be the name of the plugin that you're trying to create. Well, that's really cool, but if you do it just like that, then your $ gets missing, the one that we use as an alias for the jQuery object. So what we need to do for that is we need to pass jQuery to an immediately invoked function expression, which is, in this case, we're passing jQuery and telling it we're going to map it to the $. So now we can use the $ inside of our code just like we did before. In doing it this way, what this happens to do is it creates the ability for you to use this alias without conflict in any other object that's also using that as an alias. To improve it even just a little bit further, we've added a semicolon here in the beginning. And what that does, which this isn't something that you see a lot of, but what I find is it's kind of a safety net against concatenated scripts or other plugins that may not have been closed properly. So this just kind of keeps it from running into your stuff. It closes it out before it starts yours. And we're also going to pass the window so that instead of being a global variable, it becomes a local variable. That slightly quickens the resolution process. And it allows more efficient minification for when you actually choose to minify your stuff. Any questions so far? Good. Okay, so now that we have our basic shell, I'm going to just throw out a little comment about context here for the this keyword. Sometimes this is confusing to developers for someone who is kind of new to this. When you first come in, this right here is actually referring to the jQuery object that the plugin was invoked on. It does not refer to the document object model or any element within it. Inside of here, you would use this keyword that would be wrapped in like this to refer to an element in the DOM. So just important, this versus being the jQuery object and this being elements in the document object model. So this is a plugin that actually does something. It's kind of silly something, but it does something. And what this actually does is it takes and finds the tallest height of any div or element, I guess. In this case, it's a div because that's what we're passing here in our little code. We're saying get the max height of all div objects. So this would come in here and it would say, I'm going to start with 0, and for each div in here, which is taller, the height of the object or my last value? And it's going to return that as an integer. So this would be a plugin in its own right, and it's pretty simple, right? Most plugins wouldn't be like this, but it is just the way of letting you see how simple it could be. So the next important part is chainability. Chainability is part of the jQuery design that makes it really popular. It's the whole reason people like it, or at least it's one of the reasons people like it so much. You can call a method and chain it right to the next method and continue on, passing on the same things that you just worked on. So the only way to maintain the chainability is to return this. That is what causes you to be able to chain out to the next. In this case, we're doing lock dimensions, and because we're returning this, which is the jQuery object, we can chain off to the next little function that we choose. I just chose CSS as something to show you there. So this doesn't really do a whole lot. It just says whatever the width is or the height is, just make it what it was. And it was just meant to show you how chainability would actually work. And if you want to pass information in type, we would be passing in width, the string, which would be used for us to check inside of our plugin. So when you have a plugin that has options to it, you need to provide those options for the user to actually look at and see. So the best way to do that is using the jQuery extend method, which we're passing in some options, and we're saying take those options and we're going to convert them into settings, which is a location default is top and the background color, the default will be blue. In our little code down here, when we're saying for this tooltip we're passing in a left location, it would override the top, but it would leave the default color of blue because we didn't pass anything in. So we could pass in one or more or none. You could just set all the defaults. Or we could pass in some options. I think that's it on this page.
So extend is very much an inherited class.
It is.
Virtual override.
It is. The jQuery extend method will say take what I have and extend it so that I can use these bits of information inside of this plugin.
It's taking that anonymous object, that's the first parameter, and adding whatever properties are in the options to that anonymous object.
They're function pointers, which means they're technically by graph.
That's an anonymous object, not a function pointer.
But if you could add function pointers to it.
You could.
If
You're talking about the
options contain a function pointer, the function pointer would be maintained throughout the scope of the app, right? It's not a
I believe so.
You're talking about the object literals there? Yeah.
Like if options were to actually have a second thing, a function pointer, that would be get underscore name. That function pointer would still, if you called it, would actually physically call back to your original object and actually define that function pointer, correct?
It would, but if you're wanting to add methods, then there's a different way to do that.
I don't think it's, if you're asking technically, I think it would be a closure around the object you're defining to extend that anonymous object. So yeah.
Cool. Okay, so that was the basics of writing your own, but I'm going to actually show you some real plugins once I find my mouse. I guess I won't do that because it cuts off some of my screen. So I made this little MVC application, and all it does is take in, show you some of the plugins that I've downloaded and I put together for you to actually see some of them in action. So we're going to look at some that has curve appeal. So what this is, it's actually just text, and ArcText, which is the plugin, will curve it for you, either up and down, you know, like a frowny face or a smiley face. The code behind this is actually just text, and it's the CSS and the jQuery plugin that is actually making it art. So an example might be, in this case, we're calling ArcText and we're giving it a radius, and that changes the text in this case to have a radius on a circle that's 300 and makes it look curved. If you want it to go downward, you have to change the direction. You have to pass a -1. By default, it will go in an overhead arc. You can keep it so that the letters don't rotate. In this case, instead of having the letters fit to the arc, it just stays straight up and down. And this one, it shows you that you can do a little bit of animation. So the code here is just saying, give me a 300 millisecond ease out.
That's kind of cool.
And this one is a similar thing. It just changes it for you.
Turn that round upside down.
That's right. Gotta make it nice.
Nice.
So that's arc text. It's a pretty simple one. This is one about truncating text. So if you have some that's way big and you want to make it smaller to fit the screen, the default value for this is just truncate. And what it does is it takes the length of it, and if you hover over it, it will give you the entire text that was under there. It won't expand or contract in this default form, but it does let you see it when you hover. You have the option of telling it how many lines to show. So this one would probably actually be about 7, 8 lines if it were, well, maybe not that, 5 or 6. But we passed it and told it we want 4 lines, which I think it's a funny little thing because you have to put one more line in there than actually shows up. So instead of 3, I had to put in 4 to make 3 lines show up. Custom fill, if you look at the default, is it a little ellipsis at the end? And you can change that. So in this case, I've got 2 little double arrows, and it's just passing in what I want, a string for what I want in that fill. Here, make it bigger for you. So it's actually putting the little double arrows. And you can toggle it. In this case, what we did in our fill was we added a little hyperlink and 2 little pieces of code that tells what happens when you click on it. So if I want to read more, it will show me all of it. And if I don't want to read it all, it will put it back down to a single line for me. So these are simple things. That was just how to truncate some text. This is about edit masks. We know in Windows development we can put in edit masks and the user can only put in certain types of information and it has to fit the mask. So in this case what we're saying is this is our mask over here, so when we highlight the text it kind of gives us the format of what we want. Now I can't just type anything in here. I have to only type numeric numbers. So if I wanted to put something in here, I could. And if I didn't complete it, when I go out, it will just clear it. And what I did in that case was to prove that although this has an edit mask, it does not have validation. So if you want to validate it, you need to add something that requires, you know, a regex or something that can help you validate the text that's actually entered. This one here, this little question mark tells you that what comes after it is optional. So if I come in and I try to type something and I don't fill it out, again it will clear itself. However, as long as I fill in the part that's not optional, it won't require me to fill in the rest. But it will let me if I want to. This little asterisk means it can be any alpha or numeric character. So while in this first place I can't type numbers, I can only type letters. In the second place, I can type either or. Now these are the defaults that come with it, but you can extend it. So in this case, we've made a little extension. And I'm going to show you the little extension piece here. We just made a little definition. and we said we want that tilde sign to be a plus or a minus. So in this case, a prescription for an eyeglass prescription, it requires something like that.
Yeah, you're really blind at that point.
So that would be providing an actual eyeglass prescription, but like you said, you would be pretty blind in this case.
If you had negative and positive, same thing, you got improved.
Now, I did this one just as a case to show you that it popped up a little something. So if you wanted to put your validation in here, you could actually do that as well. And that is input masks. Those were really simple ones. This one's kind of cool. What it does is it took a list of over 400 items and created a menu for you. And all it is just calling list menu. And although it's really high above it, it tells you how many items are actually under. For example, J has 2 and I has 9. And you could go and just look at the items under there. So this is what it actually looked like before.
Oh.
This big long old list. And again, once you apply the plugin.
So it's just taking the ULLI and converting it into menus?
Yes. There's a few options that come with it. In this case, we told it not to include numbers, which, if you look at the original, has a 0 to 9 up here. That would go away. Include other is true, so what happens, didn't mean to do that, is it adds this ellipsis on the end. And that shows, although you can't see it very well,
You take the size of the screen, not the active.
let's scroll it down a little bit. These are characters that actually have letters that have umlauts and things above them, so they don't fit our alphabet. And if you hover over something that actually has nothing under it, we've told it what text to say, which is no items are under this letter. So the other default that you would notice if you were back here is that it has 4 actual columns and there's a certain amount of pixels in between. In this case, we've changed it so that there's actually 5 columns. So that's again one of those things that you can manipulate. You can use ordered lists. So in this case, the ordered list, if you did it, A's would be 1 through whatever, and then B's would be like 6 through whatever. It actually reorders these numbers so that it shows you starting from 1 on each particular subset. And child elements. Okay, so all of these are in paragraph tags. These are all div tags, except for this little blurb at the top, which is the paragraph tag. These are all various tags. These are div tags, paragraph tags, and hyperlinks. This is just to show you can use any kind if you want. It doesn't have to be a specific type of tag. And this one was just kind of like an address book. Just showing you some of the flexibility of how this one works. This one is similar. It takes a list, and again, it shows you all of it. This is more of a filter, though, so when you click on B, it just shows you B. Let's see. Find some that have some cool stuff in it. These are just links. Again, they don't go anywhere. There was one that I wanted to show you. I can't remember which one it was. well, this one. This one has a little thing called prefixes. So if you look down here, you'll see a bunch of them that start with the. And there's, several that really are A's and several that really are C's. So if you look under the T's, they show up there. But because of this prefix that we've added, they'll also show up under the place where they really belong. Context menus. We all know they're kind of ugly. So this is what a default one looks like. This is my Despicable Me menu. And it's just a way of making a menu that's kind of cool and gives them a more pretty look, I guess you would say. These are some of the more unusual ones. These are barcodes. It took this and already created a barcode down here for us, but we could do we could change the width and the height, and it would make it bigger, smaller.
Is that barcode like a font or an image, or what is that?
Hopefully it's a mathematical image.
It's just a mathematical image.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The fonts are never accurate. You can never scan them on the screen. This is really cool. Because we work with code 128 all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We've got the different versions.
Code 128 is very picky with scanners too.
So we're going to change that value. And now we've got, this is an EAN 13, and what it actually does is it puts a little check digit on there. So it's really 12 characters, and then you get the check digit.
You can do 2D?
Yeah, data matrix.
That's awesome.
Creates a little.
This is just called barcode helper?
This one is, let me find out.
That's okay, I can get you an email.
This is Barcode Coder. It's a barcode jQuery plugin is the name of it.
SVG is not compatible with IE, really?
In this sense, when they put this out, it wasn't.
Okay.
It may be by now, but I just went with their demonstration. So, and you can change colors. And do what kind of things you want. Just change the background, which in this case is pretty ugly.
So you combine this with like a flat screen little display sitting on the wall warehouse, man. You can do some cool stuff with this.
Yeah. Okay, so data matrix. This one does QR codes. And this actually says this is a test. And if you change it, it'll update this again. QR codes are not the same as data matrix. There is sometimes confusion about that, but they're not the same. There's a website out there that will tell you all about them if you're really interested. But basically, data matrix is meant to hold something small, whereas a QR code is meant to give a whole big bunch of information at once, so that when somebody scans the QR code, they can get anything from coupons to, a flyer to whatever in that code. If not, as long as they have something that can read it. And then the last, this one is called Signature Pad, and it has a couple of options here. It can take your typed in, and I'm using a kind of a font to make it look kind of like a signature. But it also has a point where you can draw something.
So if you had a touchscreen app, you could kind of draw it.
And this one works with touchscreen applications. So when I click this, what it did is, in the background, I saved it to an image, and now it's showing me the image of those things that were saved.
You did a post back to the server?
This case I did.
Okay.
And
Was the image actually rendered on the client?
the image is a file. I saved the image to a file. You can save it to a database. You can do whatever you want.
Was the image generated in JavaScript, or did it send back the metadata and there's a server-side component that actually generated the image?
Let me go back to the page and I'll kind of explain it. This one has a hidden object that converts this piece to JSON. So whatever you put in here, it will actually convert it to JSON.
The pixels.
The pixels. And I took those pixels and I converted it to an image.
Using GDI?
Actually, there was some C# code that I took and modified to fit what I wanted.
It's pretty cool.
So,
I wish I had the VAs in here so they could see some of this stuff. I might have you meet with them after this.
cool. So, those are some samples. I'm open either to showing you some of the code or for questions at this point.
I've got a thought question. It's, we've used active reports a lot to make reports like PDFs, and I get a lot of complaints because active reports is really buggy. What do you think of using like some jQuery plugins and HTML and converting that to PDF and not even using a report engine?
Were you there yet? That's what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, do you guys think that's a good option, or do you think we're still better off using buggy active reports or another tool?
The problem is you have to almost stick to one browser, because, you know, you're gonna write it for one CSS, you're gonna get to work in one, and you're gonna have the IE factor or the Mozilla factor where you're gonna have obscure things that don't render correctly. And then the problem is the whole forcing the print, you know, so I created a warehouse application once and they wanted to go from the browser, create a PDF and print it, and it's like, well, you really can't do that. You can't really force the control P and then hit the enter button for the user. Unfortunately, because of security concerns, you have to, the person has to interact.
Matt did something all server side.
Right, server side's easy, but client side.
Yeah, he had some tool that took any HTML and made a PDF out of it. I don't know if that's something we could use, or,
I mean, I've done,
Bob did something similar too, so I'm gonna hit him up.
I do XSLT.
I don't have any input on that. There are some possible options, but as he said, you'd have to be able to make it work with all browsers, as well as having a mobile version if you wanted something for
Mhm.
smaller screens. Could be something to play with.
so
The
also-
problem also is gonna be if you're taking HTML and trying to move that to PDF,
Mhm.
if you're trying to use JavaScript, that's not gonna go to PDF because it's modifying the DOM after the fact,
Okay.
you know. I would think.
Yeah, so like you couldn't get the bar code, maybe.
I don't know, I'm just saying it's something to be aware of.
Thinking of like that really sophisticated pick ticket we did for Coke, if we could just do it in HTML, it'd almost be easier than having to do it in a reporting tool.
If you don't have to print it and all you wanna do is render it, then you can do a lot of crazy stuff in HTML.
Well, the point is to save it off to a PDF, and
Yes,
so you
yes.
print the PDF.
That's when it comes to.
But where is that save taking place, on the server
On the
or
server,
on?
have to be.
If it's on the server, then you're not running a JavaScript engine to render it and modify the DOM like this.
See, I've done stuff where, you know, there's flat screen apps and they go up and they physically read what they need to do, but if I just was able to render QR code, not QR codes, but the 2D codes or even code 128, and have them hit it with a barcode scanner, you can physically tell your people in the warehouse
Scan the
where they
screen.
scan the screen, it'll tell you what to do next, instead of freaking walking all the way back and going, what do I do? You know, because the communication, you get into a warehouse, I don't care how many freaking computers you put, I've never had good Wi-Fi reception in a large warehouse. There's always problems, especially when you start getting the inventory levels really high, it starts blocking the signals. So if they could just walk up to a screen and get a list of the next instructions.
Ask Rob that question, because he did a proof of concept on the Moorhead project for
Okay.
that, so. I don't remember where it landed with the, because we had the PDF requirement as well. I can't remember if he was able to do that piece of it or not.
Cool.
Yeah, that was not a fun piece.
Anything else?
Okay. I'm going to show you just for the last little bit, a small bit of the code. And it does not fit the screen at all. So this was our context menu page, and I've got the links to all the places I actually got these, but they're commented out. So if anybody wants to know where some of these came from, I can give you that. But really, the things that you needed to look at was, I got a CSS file, and I have a script file, this contextmenu.js. Those were the two things I needed to include in order to make it work. jQuery is on my, what kind of becomes the master page in MVC. So all I had to do was add this on this page. And then this is the actual little bit of script that makes the context menu actually show up. So as you can see, it's not difficult to add a plugin into your code. Okay, so I'm going to say that unless there are more questions, we are done.
Very good, thank you.